Thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Crystal Hooper. I am the conference co-chair for the NJALA. Today you're here for a program about notary services. It's going to be hosted by Nicole Pascoe. She is the Civic Services Manager at the Somerset County Library System of New Jersey. In Nicole's role, she supervises the careful interpretation of federal laws, state and local policies and procedures, and she helps train everyone in Somerset County who is a notary. During the presentation today, please type any questions you have into the chat box, and we will address those at the end of her presentation. At this time, I'm going to pass it over to Nicole.
Thanks, Crystal. Thanks so much. And thanks to the NJALA committee, for having me today and for working with me, honestly, more than the past year in bringing this content to you all. So again, thanks so much for joining us. You're in the presentation regarding what it's like to be a notary in a library. So as Crystal noted, I'm presenting some content that's been requested by you all over the years. There has been interest among NJALA participants to hear more about notary services. So I'm really happy to be sharing this today and shed some light on this for you. So we will cover a lot of ground today. As they say, take the gold and leave the rest. And please also keep in mind that notary law may change over time. Our newest issue of the New Jersey Notary Manual was just issued in January of this year. So information does change and laws are interpretable. New Jersey notary law is widely interpretable, and the Somerset County Library System of our great state of New Jersey, for which I work, works with experts in the field to define our procedures and our best practices. So I'll be sharing with you information today based on that and what it's like to be a staff notary and offer these services. So for those of you that I haven't gotten the chance to meet yet, as Crystal said, my name is Nicole Pascoe. I manage civic services for the Somerset County Library System, or SCLS-NJ. I have been with our system for 4 years, and I've been a notary for that whole time as well, and overseeing the program that includes our notary procedure, our onboarding and training of staff notaries, keeping our notary commissions up to date and working on renewals every 5 years for those, supply orders and needs, and outlining our best practices. So today we will cover a number of topics, including what you see here on this screen. We'll start with the definition and purpose of a notary public and notary services. Then for a little bit of context, I'll spend a brief time on Somerset County Library System's notary history and our why behind why we offer notary services. Then we'll look through a sample notary appointment. We'll talk a little bit about appointment booking from the beginning of the process, the pre-screening, all the way through the end of the appointment. We'll go through a whole sample notary session and visit some common document types. We'll take a look at what we see a lot of in the Somerset County Library System. We'll highlight one in particular. We'll talk about the basic notarial acts that you can perform as a notary in the state of New Jersey. It's really important to share some context on those. And then if we do have time, we can flow through the steps of how to become a notary in New Jersey, if that's something that you're personally interested in or something that your organization is working toward. And we have tips, tools, and resources at the end of the presentation as well. Okay, so first things first, notary public defined. So a notary public is a person of proven integrity, appointed by a state government to serve the public. And we're serving the public in this role as a notary public, as an impartial witness, and we have specific duties given to us by law. So the notary has the power to witness the signing of documents. We also have the power to administer oaths. And I've highlighted some important, buzzwords, if you will, on this slide here for you to refer to. We participate in a variety of fraud deterrent acts. So a really handy resource that I actually have here, if you can see me in the way you have your screen set up, it's the Notary Public Handbook by Alfred Piombino. This is one of the resources I pull from for content for the presentation, as well as from the National Notary Association and the American Society of Notaries. Those are the three I use a lot. But in Alfred's text, chapter 1, page 1, literally, he describes the notary public as a state officer And the office of a notary public is technically a ministerial office, meaning it doesn't involve significant judgment or discretion of the notarial act being performed. And I'll break this down in my words as well. So as such, he compares the office of a notary public to that of a county, city, or township clerk. It's not a judicial or legislative position. So what does that mean? So we're serving as impartial witnesses. We're not providing legal advice as notaries. We're not empowered to, required to, nor necessarily qualified to provide legal advice from the position of a notary public. Oh, thank you so much for putting that in there. Yes, Alfred Piombino has authored quite a lot. And so we're not explaining the contents of a document to a patron. We're there to serve in our official capacity as a notary public. There is what we have found to be in our library system a pretty common misconception that we can go over the details of a document with an individual. But that's not the area in which we are serving, and that's not part of what we're doing. So that's how Alfred frames it, as not a judicial or legislative position. We're not reviewing the documents in detail. So the purpose of notary public services. So the part we called out here on this slide. So effective notary service, it ensures that documents are executed properly, that facts are certified, and more than anything else, it serves to help protect the general public from fraud. So all this being said about not a judicial position or legislative position, it's still a position of high importance. Notary publics are very important and serve important functions. Many of us in the room, I'm sure, have had to seek notary services at some time, or maybe we're performing notary services in our libraries or on personal time today. So as many of you may know, there's a variety of official acts being performed, some with documents that can be contentious, some with documents that have, really far-reaching impact on an individual's life. So very important. Some on the list here are mortgages, deeds, and contracts. We see a lot of powers of attorney, a huge variety of different affidavits. We see a lot of different types of documents throughout the library system. So just for some context, I'd like to provide a little bit of history of SCLS-NJ's Notary Services program, just for you to have in mind. This is also my experience with notary services, and what qualifies me to present on this is just my involvement in this level of activity and my practice as a notary public as well. So our library system, SCLS-NJ, began formally offering services system-wide in 2015. So prior to this, we offered service throughout the system less formally by staff who were already commissioned as notaries public. But in the lead up to this wider launch in 2015, many additional staff became commissioned notaries public. And you can see them pictured in this screen grab from a Patch article back in it looks like it was December of that year, 2015. So a number of new staff became notaries. And at that point, we had more than 30 staff notaries who had been sworn in and were acting as those impartial witnesses, performing their notarial duties. So we offered out of all 10 locations and have continued to do so over the years. When we were closed to the public, of course, we were closed to the public. When we reopened, we have been coming back to full service. And right now we're at 8 out of our 10 branch locations. Over these past number of years, 6 years, we have had different numbers of notaries. Of course, it fluctuates, personnel changes, and things of that nature. And we've had anywhere between 20 and 45. And in late 2019 into 2020, when we restructured our notary service, I was at the helm of this action. We pared down our notary staff. We have about 20 now who operate. We are focusing on clarity, consistency, and confidence in offering this service to the public, because there's certainly a lot to interpret here. We also shifted from walk-in to appointment-based service, and this is something I like to share for beginner notaries as well, and those who are in decision-making roles in libraries alike. So we decided to switch from walk-in to appointment-based to help us get to yes during an appointment session and before. So we implemented a screening process, which we'll talk a little bit about later. I think it's useful for any notary, whether practicing through a library or other professional setting or personally, to screen your patrons, go over a list of questions before you work with them, to make sure that when you're in the room together and you're in the appointment session, that you are able to complete the notarial act together that day. So we'll talk about that a little bit more later in the presentation. And when someone is looking to work with SCLS-NJ on notary services, they can make appointments online or by phone. So we switched to appointment-based in the beginning of 2020. We closed to the public, of course, March through July. And upon our reopening, we added a layer of online appointment booking, which I'm always glad to go into more detail about offline if someone would like to speak about that. So those are some of the changes that we've gone through over the years, but what has remained the same is our why. So I've outlined our why, our reasoning behind offering notary services here in 4 general points. And of course, there are other reasons as well that this benefits the public. But the first is to generate goodwill in the community. And we can offer services to the public free of charge. We can offer these notary services. We have the capacity to do so, so we do so. Our staff who offer notary services, they are notaries in addition to their primary role. So we may have a library assistant, a full-time librarian, a circulation team member, a civic services team member, and more, offering notary services to their own capacity in consultation with their supervisor to the public. So we offer these services because we can. We offer these services because there is a public need. So we have had many inquiries over the years, which maybe your library has had as well. And that's something that has brought you here today to see more about what it's like to be a notary. So our leadership, our public services leadership, was prompted to streamline the service offerings back in 2015. And we've been working to refine them, improve them, and make them more consistent since then. Another reason that we offer these services, we're a county library system, so we can support our county service offerings. So our county clerk of Somerset County offers notary services, but an interesting piece here is that the county clerk cannot notarize documents that they file, such as deeds. So we can be a great support to our county clerk notary team by offering these services as well. And then, of course, to welcome new patrons into the library. And based on our 2019 statistics, since that's the last full year that we worked, so we estimated, actually, I picked a larger range than just 2019. So since 2015, we have served over 10,000 patrons in terms of notary services. So we've had over 10,000 individuals work with us over the last 6 years. And that's just what has made it into all of the documentation that we've been growing and streamlining over the past 6 years. So that was all to share a little bit of context with you. And now we'll take a look at notary appointment booking. We'll move through these rather quickly so we can get into the sample notary interaction. But I did see it as super valuable to show you a bit of what our patrons experience. So notary appointments are booked online or by phone. And again, the schedules are set based on individual staff notary schedules. That's the best way that we have found to offer this service in a library setting, is of course based on the individual. We do not have any, full-time or part-time solely dedicated to notary services. Everyone has a different primary role that they serve. And the screen grab that you see is the links to the forms to book appointments that exists on our webpage. So our webpage, sclsnj.org/notary. This is part of what you will see on that page. It describes the location of service and how to go about scheduling, as you can see broken down before you. So each link takes you to the individual branch schedule. Patrons always have the option to call. And again, if anyone has any questions about the scheduling software that we use, I'm always glad to talk about that. Feel free to grab my contact information at the end and follow up with me if anyone is interested in how to use appointment booking for notary services. So then from there, we provide a lot of information to our patrons to begin with. We provide info, as you can see laid out before you, in 3 parts: information about identification requirements, a little bit about documents to be notarized, and just a little bit of a heads up for our patrons. And then also important information about signers and witnesses needing to be present, and that our library system doesn't provide witnesses. That's very common in a library setting for notary services. And then these next 2 slides are our screening questions. So this is something that every library notary in Somerset County Library System is now familiar with and works through as a part of processing when booking an appointment. So this is getting into the territory of really what it truly is like to be a notary in a library. So when we receive notification that an appointment has been booked through our scheduling software, we get that through email. That pops up for us. We can see some of the patron information, and we also ask this series of questions. So there are 4 questions on this slide, and there are a few more on the next. But these are some of the pieces of information over the years that we have found it important to know before a patron comes before us. Even if it's just through a casual phone conversation, we're following up and flowing through this list of questions with a patron interested in notary services to make sure that we can move forward and meet their notary needs. So that's often how we frame this to the public. We're moving through these questions with you because we want to ensure that we can meet your needs when you're here with us in person. And if we cannot, save you a trip and then also perhaps recommend or point you in the direction of other resources or give our best guidance for next steps. Never legal advice, but certainly conversation about alternative options. So it's good to know the title of the document. As a notary, you start to become familiar with the different document types that you see most often, and we'll look at those a few slides from now, at least as they are for Somerset County Library System. And this certainly varies regionally. We even see some variants branch to branch location within the same county of Somerset. So the title of the document gives the notary a clue as to maybe what notarial act might need to be performed and past experiences of working with that document. Knowing the page number of the document is very helpful for us in terms of being protective of notary time and also knowing when to invest additional time into a notary appointment session. So we'll see through the steps, the checklist during a notary appointment of what a notary should reasonably be doing during an appointment session. You'll be reviewing the document, checking the document over for blank spaces. So if that document is 400 pages versus 1 page, it's a very different time investment, even just for paging through. We don't often get 400-page documents. I don't mean to incite any alarm. So it's also good to know how many signers will be present during the appointment. This helps us in terms of spatial needs and preparing for the session, especially through 2020 and 2021 with social distancing guidelines. Knowing this information in advance helped us set the stage for the notary appointment. So there wasn't as much last minute shuffling if there were patrons also trying to social distance from one another. And then a notary certificate. So we'll talk more about those and look at samples in a few slides as well. It's very helpful to know in advance whether or not there is a notary certificate on the document. And we found an even more helpful way to phrase this for our patrons who might not be calling the language on the document a certificate or knowing about that language. Are there any instructions or indication provided to the notary around the signature panel of the document? This is a review that we covered already. So does your document require any witnesses? This is important for a variety of reasons. One of them being that we do not provide them at our library, and that's a library decision maker level call to make. And then is your document complete? This is very helpful when you begin reviewing a document, knowing that the patron has noted that it's complete. You're scanning for blank spaces. And can the document signers and anyone else who's signing or having their signature notarized that day, can they provide current identification? Also good to know in advance. And a good opportunity for patrons, if they don't have the identity documents on hand, give them a heads up and a chance to locate them. Okay, so this is the rest of what appears on our webpage, which you can of course follow up and take a look at if you'd like to get into more details on. But some of the highlights of the important considerations that we point out to patrons before they join us in the library is that we generally work with just 3 notarial acts per visit. This is a general limitation, and we keep this flexible strategically so that we can work with a patron. Say they have 4 documents, 5 documents, we've screened them, we know that we'll move through rather quickly. Or there is a session where they'd maybe be coming back multiple times in order to just meet our 3 document requirement. Maybe we'll extend our 1 appointment with them so we can accommodate them if it works with our scheduling capacity as well. So just a few highlights out of here. It's good to know if a document doesn't have a notarial certificate on it at all, and we'll flow through what those are in a few slides. So these are just some general pieces of information. We're answering some questions in advance, and it's a good resource to direct patrons to. Okay, so we're at our word cloud. So this collection of words before you represents the statistics, the log of activity of all notary services throughout the Somerset County Library System in calendar year 2019. I wanted to pull from a full year of service and a year of more typical notary activity to see what types of documents we're working with most. So as you can see, one of the largest and most centered terms is an affidavit. You also see letter really stands out. Power and attorney stand out because we see many power of attorney forms. So please take a look around, take that in, come back to the slide if you want to take a look around in more detail. But these are the types of documents that we see the most. We also see a number of passport documents, and we see a number of requests for copy certification, which is a nuance that I did remove from the presentation, but I'm here for questions on that if anyone has specific questions. That's more when you get into the notary training territory. But we do get a lot of requests for it, so it appears in our pie chart as well. So this is just another view of that same information of the top 5, words, phrases, or document types that we see in the library setting. So over 30%, what we see the most of are documents that are letters. So are these all just personal letters? No, certainly not necessarily. Maybe this is a letter authorizing the local school to take my child on a field trip, or a letter to the recreation department authorizing my child to play soccer. Or maybe this is a letter of authorization for a minor traveling. We see these in passport applications as well, or a letter to a local official indicating that my carbon monoxide detector is up to date in my business, or so on and so forth. So we see a variety of different types of letters, not just personal, but also from official settings. And then we see many affidavits, and we'll get into the definition of that later as well. But affidavits are sworn statements where individuals are swearing that the contents of their statement or of the document are true, swearing or affirming, I should say. And then we do see a lot of power of attorney documents. We see passport documents and certified copy requests. Again, I'll go into the nuances of any of these, especially if anyone has questions or experience with these in the past. But you certainly get more into those when you attend notary trainings or connect with practiced notaries. Okay. So now what we will move on into is the notary appointment checklist. So this has been adapted from a few different sources. The National Notary Association. We've also looked at the New Jersey Notary Manual. And that's a great place to reference from the Division of Revenue and Enterprise Services. Like I said earlier, it was just updated in January. So we have come up with an internal checklist for use throughout SCLS NJ. And please, adapt as you will. And on the resources page, I should be referring to where this was pulled from and adapted from. But step 1, so when a patron visits you in the library for your appointment, so maybe you've gone through your screening process if you opt to do that, your patron's coming in at 2 p.m. today, time of our presentation, what's the first thing you're doing? So it's much the same as what you would do in any library position or role. You're going to greet the individual coming in for the appointment. So you're greeting them, and this is a great time to see their identification documents and ask them to provide those. If you've screened them, you'll already have an idea of what they will be and what you're looking for. And then the second step you flow into very naturally. You're going to carefully identify the signer. And there are 3 general methods that I have pulled out and outlined here on the slide, and I'll explain a bit about what those 3 are. So personal knowledge, perhaps self-explanatory. Notaries are empowered to notarize for someone without identifying them by other means if they do have personal knowledge. So that's certainly a judgment call. It just means that you personally know the signer. Is it a longtime neighbor? Family members, there's a lot to consider about remaining impartial when you're working with certain documents. Is this a lifelong friend that you're very familiar with and you're not invested in the outcome of their document in any way where it would be appropriate to notarize for them? So you can identify someone personally just by virtue of knowing them. The second one is very uncommon in our experience because of the nuances of credible identifying witnesses in New Jersey related to notarial law. So a credible identifying witness is someone who knows personally both the notary and the signer. So if the signer does not have any ID documents and you do not know the signer personally, a credible identifying witness that you do know personally who has an ID, it's a little convoluted, and can also vouch for the identity of the individual signer. That is a means of identification. So I will note that although this appears in notary training nationally all over the place, anywhere that I've taken a training from, this appears, it is not something that I have any record of using in the library setting before. Very uncommon. And then from there, the third is the most common, using identification documents. So viewing a driver's license, passport, other government issued ID. This is the absolute most common method. And we're identifying the patron. We're making a layperson's judgment that the person before us is the person pictured on the ID, is the person named in the document. So there are a lot of different ways to do that. What we did note in our internal notary procedure, because of mask requirements through 2020, of course, and into 2021, in order to properly identify a signer, it is important to see their whole face. So the signers who would visit our library when face coverings were being worn would remove their face covering briefly and then replace it after they were identified. So very early on in the session is a great time to do this as a notary, and it's something you can expect. There are also alternate ways to view a signer that we learned through the National Notary Association if someone were not comfortable removing their face covering. So through a window, one person inside, one person outside the building, through a window door, lots of nuances. The National Notary Association has a national purview, so they get into a lot of wonderful, helpful details. And the third is to review the document. So we talked about this a little bit earlier. So we're not providing legal advice. We're not formally reviewing documents. We're never explaining a document to a patron. So as such, checking over a document, it's also not a formal legal review, such as might be performed by an accountant or an attorney. So what we're instead doing during this time is outlined here. We're looking for certificate wording. So what is that? We'll see some photos of that later. We're looking for wording that tells the notary what notarial act is being performed. What is the notary doing? What is the action that's being performed during this appointment? So the notary certificate wording, we're able to determine from there which one of the two basic notarial acts that we can perform in the state of New Jersey is being requested if the certificate language is on there. We're also going to check the document for blank spaces, as the document must be complete before we move forward with a notarial act. Sometimes, for example, people will leave a social security number field or another very important piece of personal data blank until right before they sign and get ready to send off a document somewhere. So these are some things we get used to and we're used to pointing out as staff notaries, again, never providing advice or answering questions from the patron about the contents of the document. And you're also going to make sure that there's a section for you to enter the date. So the beauty of this is in the notary certificate area, even if there is nowhere to enter the date, you can handwrite it in. It's important that notary certificates be dated. It's important that your records have an indication of when your notarial act was performed for that particular document. And then verifying the name on the ID. So you're verifying the name on the identification that it supports the name that's in the document. So I'll use my name as an example. My full name, first, middle, last is Nicole Christina Pascoe. So that's what appears on my ID. That appears on my driver's license. My full name is spelled out Nicole Christina Pascoe. If I'm presenting you a document and I'm listed as Nicole C. Pascoe with just my initial for my middle name, you can reasonably, with a layperson's judgment, see that as satisfactory evidence that I am the person that is named in that document because the names do match. So with that incidental change of the initial. So that's just a small example of what you might see in the way of names as a staff notary. And there are tons of resources for more nuances out there. So then moving on to step 4, you'll screen the signer for awareness and willingness. So how does this break down? There are some notes on here that, yes, you can do this with small talk and basic questions. When it comes to a signer's awareness, again, I'll use that term, you're making a layperson's judgment that someone is aware and understanding of what is happening. So I generally do this when the patron joins us. Sometimes I'll confirm today's date with them, or I'll talk about what's going on outside with the weather, make reference, ensure that they know that we're in a library setting and that I am indeed a notary public. So this can all be done just through general greetings and hellos and questions about the document. So what kind of document are we working with today? I will let the patron take the lead on letting me know the title of the document and maybe who else is with them in their party. This also helps confirm that they're signing willingly and not under any pressure from anyone else in their party with them that day. So there's a lot of opportunity to do this during the first, 3 steps before getting to know the patron a little bit when they arrive for their appointment. And then the next piece, it looks large, but it's really just a lot of details about one important area. It's keeping a journal record. So recording your journal entry, we highly recommend through the Somerset County Library system. It's not technically required in the state of New Jersey, but keeping a journal record of each notary interaction is also referenced in the New Jersey Notary Manual, though not legally required. So this is a list of what you would seek to include in your notary journal when you are keeping a log of each interaction that you have. And your notary journal is private to you. You're not required to share that with your employer. We do some reporting out internally at will from our notaries of how many interactions they've had, but we of course are not asking for any personal information of the patrons that they work with. So some of the things to include: date and time of the notarial act, the type of act. So that means which basic notarial act you're performing. Was it an oath or affirmation, or was it an acknowledgement? We'll talk about those in a few slides as well. The date and title of document are always important. Name and address of each signer, whether it's just a principal signer or if they have witnesses as well, or it's a multiple signer document that day. The form of identification. So you really just need to know if you've used an identity document, if you've used a credible witness, or if you personally know the individual. It's not required for you to take down any information about their ID document itself, other than the fact that it was an ID document. And then other information. So if you have any observations about the interaction or additional details about the document, like the number of pages, for example, many notaries will keep. We'll talk about loose certificates at the end of the presentation. So if there was no certificate present on the document and then the notary patron elected to attach one from a supply that you may have on hand, we'll talk about that. And then whether the notarial act was performed, what location it was performed in. So where were you? Were you performing this at the library? Did you perform this, at home or offsite somewhere else outside of your library responsibilities? So helpful to note that. And now the last three: perform the required notarial act. We'll talk about that in the next few slides as we work through a quick sample notary interaction on a power of attorney. So you're taking the signer's acknowledgement or administering an oath or affirmation to them, as is required by the notarial certificate or requested by the signer. And then you're performing what we refer to as a verbal ceremony. So you're verbally administering this oath or affirmation to them, or verbally accepting their acknowledgement that they've signed their document freely. And again, that's indicated in the certificate. And then from there, you're completing said certificate. So you're taking a look at it, you're reviewing the certificate for correctness. So when you're completing a certificate, you want to make sure all the details are accurate. For example, what we refer to as the venue, that's the location that the notarial act was performed. So for us in Somerset County Library System, the way that venues are listed on documents, it will say state of blank, county of blank. So we're performing this at the venue of state of New Jersey, county of Somerset. So you'll see an example of that in a few as well. So that should be where the notarization was performed, and you'll fill in all other required fields, like the date, the name of the signer in the document for which you notarized, and then your notary information as well. And then finally, sign, stamp, and affix your seal. So when you're signing your name, it's important that you sign exactly as your name appears on your commission, as your signature appears on your commission. And it's also important to keep this section highly legible. And you'll see in the sample, I did a digital version of it, but you'll get the idea. So your stamp and seal should be close to where your signature is, but not overlapping. The point is for everything to be legible, make sure everything is readable, and that all three of your tools that you're using here, your stamp, your signature, and your seal, are all readable and understandable to the receiving party of the document. And so New Jersey also does not have any formal requirements for inked stamps or raised seals, but we have learned over the years that many receiving agencies will look for these type of markings on a document. So we do offer those to our patrons, and we make it a practice of providing signature, stamp, and seal on all documents that we work with. So now on to the certificates. These are samples of the type of certificates that we often see at the Somerset County Library System as practicing notaries. So there are two types of notarial acts being performed: an oath or affirmation. That's what you're seeing on the left side of your screen for a jurat certificate. And then the one that's much easier to remember is the acknowledgement certificate that indicates an acknowledgement notarial act is being performed. So when you get a certificate in front of you, when you've reviewed your document and you're now confronted, if you will, with notary certificate language, you'll first be working to determine whether it's a jurat or an acknowledgement. So you have examples here. You see the jurat is often titled as an affidavit. And the acknowledgement literally says certificate of acknowledgement. These are samples taken from the New Jersey Notary Manual. So a jurat certificate, what kind of language will you see in the certificate to help determine that it compels an oath or affirmation? You're going to see words like swearing or affirming. So in this example, I, John Smith, being duly sworn. When you look down further, you're seeing subscribed and sworn to before me on this day of this month by this person, and you enter your notary information. We'll see another sample certificate in a few pages that I've actually filled out for you. So you're looking for words like swear and affirm, subscribe to before me. So that's one area of experience that develops over time. In terms of acknowledgement, again, this is a bit simpler. You're looking for the word acknowledged. You're looking for some indication that it is an acknowledgement. You're looking in the text that someone has identified themselves to you and they've acknowledged that they're signing the document freely. So in this case, the certificate is literally called Certificate of Acknowledgement. So these are just two example certificates, as you can see, that were put together by the Division of Revenue and Enterprise Services. What you see on the bottom of this slide, I'd like to take a moment on, excuse me, as well. So these are what we refer to as the verbal ceremonies. So these are options of language. There is no state pre-prescribed language, but these are the options that are given. And I have the sources linked here as well. I believe I pulled these from American Society of Notaries. New Jersey Notary Manual has options as well. We've seen some from Alfred P. Imbino in the Notary Public Handbook, and also more information from the National Notary Association. So once you have gotten to the point when you are about to get ready to fill out the certificate or the patron is preparing to sign, you'll be performing your verbal ceremony based on the guidance of the certificate itself. So you will be asking either an oath or affirmation for the jurat certificate. So you see the oath on the bottom, and then I'm just going to toggle back and forth. There is affirmation language as well. So what's the difference there? The difference between an oath and affirmation. So an oath is compelling an individual to swear under the penalties of perjury that the information contained in a document is true before a supreme being. So before God or another supreme being. An affirmation, on the other hand, is to affirm, again, under the penalties of perjury, that the information is true, but this is on one's own honor and not before a supreme being. So when a document compels an oath or affirmation, when it contains a jurat certificate, I'll connect with the patron casually before we flow into the verbal ceremony and connect with them. Do you have a preference here if we work with an oath or an affirmation? And I'll adjust my language based on your preferences. Would you like to swear before a supreme being or affirm on your own honor? And patrons will make a selection. I'll note that in my log, and I'll go ahead with the verbal ceremony. With the acknowledgement, we work with more general language. There is no oath or affirmation required. The patron is simply acknowledging and declaring that they understand the document and that they're signing willingly. They're signing voluntarily, not under any duress, for the purposes contained within the document. So many documents already contain these notary certificates. So now we'll do a quick sample notary interaction, because it looks like we're coming up on 40 minutes and I want to make sure we have some time for questions today. So a sample notary interaction. Our example is that a patron comes before you in the library, you're a practicing library notary, and they present to you a power of attorney. Maybe you've screened them before they come in, so you know they're going to be presenting to you an identity document. They show you the power of attorney. You know that it's 4 pages. Maybe, for example, this is just a visual aid. I won't go into all the pages, of course. This is just a sample document, as you can see from online. So they've presented you this power of attorney. You're checking it over, looking for blank spaces. You're starting to prepare your journal entry. You're working through the first few steps. And now you're looking to identify, where's the notarial certificate? Where's the signature area? Where is all of this on the document? So you get down to where the individuals who are present before you are going to sign. There are actually 3 individuals in the mix here, and please feel free to refer back to this. You'll have a copy of these slides if you want to take a look at this general signature area, excuse me. There's a principal, there's an agent before you, and there's a witness with them as well. So very interesting. So how do you determine which signatures you're notarizing? As a new notary, that would have been one of my first questions. How do I know who I'm working with here and whose signature that I'm notarizing today? So this is the signature area, and right below the signature area, you see a notary certificate titled a notary acknowledgement. So what did we learn earlier? What would we learn in our notary training as we study to become a staff notary in a library setting? We learned that notary acknowledgement indicates that there is going to be an acknowledgement notarial act taking place. So I know what verbal ceremony language to pull from. I know how to move forward with this document. But how do I know who is the signer? Am I notarizing for all three individuals? Am I just notarizing the principal and agent? Does the witness need a notary as well? So this is where reading through the notary certificate early in the interaction is very helpful and important in identifying the signer. If you read through the notary certificate, on this blank date, personally put before me appeared this person described herein as the principal. So you now know that you're notarizing the signature of the principal. So there may be other requirements of the document that are separate from notary services, where there needs to be a witness or an agent signature. And that can all take place simultaneously, but your job in this situation is to act as the notary and an impartial witness to the principal's signature. So that's a little extra nuance in there for you. When it comes time to fill out the notary acknowledgement, you've performed the verbal ceremony, the patron has signed their signature or acknowledged their signature by this point, and you start filling in the venue. So as I stated earlier, it shows up as state of, county of usually, or state and county, as you can see. So you fill that in depending on where you are when you're performing the notarization. And then also a big component of notary certificates is the date. This is another requirement in New Jersey to be present in the notary certificate, and it's often in the pre-prescribed language. And then the patron's name. So the individual that you're notarizing for, so the principal of the document in this case, you will indicate that, you'll print that into the blank space, and then you'll fill out the notary information. So where it says notary public with the line, that's where your signature would go. And you'll often only see that indicated. Sometimes you'll see a place for your stamp and seal as well, but usually they leave that up to the white space that's left on the paper, or the blank space, I should say. So you'll place your notary signature exactly as it is on your commission. You'll use your stamp. We use ink stamps at the Somerset County Library System, and I have a small, as you can see, example of that. That's where it says place name here, Notary Public of New Jersey. And then we have the circle on the right-hand side. That is a raised seal. So that doesn't have an ink impression, but it's a raised seal. And many receiving agencies are interested in seeing something of that nature. And many patrons will request that we use our raised seal on their documents. So again, we do offer that as a standard, excuse me. Okay, so I'll get slightly into this so we can save about 10 minutes for questions. So when to attach a certificate form. So this is another piece of nuance, and this is something that a lot of notaries experience. So I think it's important to know before you begin notary services, not every document has pre-printed certificate language on it. While many of them do, sometimes someone will come in and have to write the details of a matter at work and need to get that notarized and submit that as a statement to human resources, or they'll be writing their own letter. Can you write a letter detailing this, get it notarized and submit it to this receiving agency? So there are certain circumstances where there will be no certificate present, and the National Notary Association, among many other sites and providers, they do have some options in this area, a general individual acknowledgement and a general DRAT certificate that patrons can choose from. The most important thing to remember when working with what we call loose certificates or attachable certificates, however you'd like to refer to them, is that the patron is making the choice, the signer is deciding which one to work with. The notary is never making that decision. That is one way of offering legal advice, which is something that we do not do as a notary. But the source is linked here. As you can see, there are a number of other circumstances under which it might be appropriate to use a certificate form. So I'll just click through, but what I highlighted here were common terms that we used throughout the presentation, and you can refer back to the sources here, and it goes into much more detail. There's a much more comprehensive list of terms that you hear a lot when it comes to notary services. If you do ever decide to move forward with notary services after learning a little bit about what notaries in the library experience and what a sample situation looks like. And then I also outline the steps to become a notary public in New Jersey. And again, this source is linked here. Where I took this from, I just pulled out the 6 most pertinent steps. And this is something we handle at the library level. here. Some libraries will have you renew your certificate and seek reimbursement. Some libraries may not provide coverage for notary related supplies and renewals of commissions. So it's different based on your organization. But I wanted to make sure you have access to this as well and know where to follow up. And then this slide shows the references and tools that I worked with today to put this presentation together. Some specific blogs and bulletins are linked throughout the presentation, as you saw. And this is where we have pulled most of our practice from over the years. And many of these sources are cited in the New Jersey Notary Public Manual, again, issued by the Division of Revenue and Enterprise Services. And I've linked this out for you. And I'm here for questions, comments, and you have my contact information here as well. Feel free to reach me if you have really specific questions or have someone in a leadership role who's trying to make a decision about whether to offer this service. I'd be glad to share our experience. So thanks so much.
Thank you for all of that information, Nicole.
Certainly.
If anyone has questions, you can certainly type them in the chat. We do have one question for you.
Thanks.
Are there any types of documents that, though proper for you to notarize, you feel uncomfortable notarizing? And are there docs that Somerset County libraries will not do?
Okay, great. Yeah, let me answer both of those. So those are two really great questions. So when we were looking to connect with our peer libraries throughout New Jersey, because we're all under New Jersey notarial law, right? So a great place to start is with our state library peers throughout the state of New Jersey. So we connected because there are many libraries that keep lists of documents that their staff notaries will not work with. And we were previously one of those libraries. So after consulting with a number of experts in the field and connecting really strongly with Mr. Piambino, connecting with the National Notary Association, our former county clerk, another expert notary trainer in New Jersey, we decided to lift out the document requirement. So in terms of feeling comfortable or uncomfortable, that's a really great question because, of course, we're all people, so there are always feelings involved in working with different types of documents. What we're working to do and reframe and train as in the Somerset County Library System is we really are impartial witnesses to this process that's taking place before us. So as long as we can deliver a proper notarization, it is part of our duty to do so. But that being said, if there is a document that we feel or can determine looking at it that okay, there is an extra level of knowledge that I might need here and that a loan signing agent would be working with. So someone presents to you a whole mortgage packet, which usually requires, I know from my own experience, just a few years ago, working with the notary, the loan signing agent, they were able to, because of extra training and qualification, to go over with myself and my husband, actually, in this case, to go over the details of the document. So as a notary public in a library setting, if we find something like that, it's perfectly appropriate to appropriately decline the notarization in our view anyhow, and to make, some recommendations perhaps, or give some suggestions of resources to move on to next, or maybe seek legal counsel to get some more information about the document. So certainly there are situations where individual staff notaries might find that something is outside of what we're able to offer at the Somerset County Library System, but it's usually due to the fact that the patron has questions about their document and less about the fact of the subject matter of the document and whether it might be a more serious or contentious subject matter. So I hope that answer was helpful. Always glad to talk more about how we arrived at that decision and some of the systems that we spoke with and standalone libraries, municipal libraries we spoke with. And then are there documents that we will not notarize? So there's a commonly requested document, an I-9 form that you may be familiar with, especially if your library offers notary services. So in those cases, notaries are authorized to act as a representative of the employer that is requesting the I-9 form to be completed by the prospective employee. But what we have arrived at is because the notary is acting not as a notary on that particular document, they're signing as an authorized representative of the employer. They're actually acting as a private citizen and not as a staff notary. So we do not ask our notaries to work in that capacity in the library setting. So I-9s are the one document that we are not working with because our our notaries are technically signing as private citizens. Those documents do not compel or require a notarization. It's simply by virtue of being in the office of notary public, which we talked about. That's an office of integrity, that that form even qualifies notaries to do that. So I hope that explained that as well. I-9s are a bit nuanced. So we put some info on our website about that also. But that's the only one that we're not working with. Other than that, so long as we can deliver a proper notarization and fit the rest of our general guidelines, we're set to go.
Thank
And
you, Nicole.
Yeah, of course. Thanks,
The
Crystal.
next question in the chat is similar, and I believe the answer is yes. Do you notarize wills and real estate transactions?
Oh, great question. Yes, we do. So we do see some standalone documents that come out of maybe a mortgage packet or in conjunction with a larger mortgage packet. We're not loan signing agents, and we don't maintain any extra level of knowledge in that area. But we do work with documents. Again, as long as we can deliver a proper notarization, we will work with it. So we can determine awareness and willingness. We can identify the individual. We can communicate one-to-one in language. That's important as well. I know I didn't touch on that, but we can communicate, one-to-one with the signer of the document, and the notary certificate is laid out, or someone is selecting a notary certificate. So as long as we can check off all of those boxes, we can move forward.
Okay, the next question is, can you notarize copies of passports?
Fantastic question. Thank you for that question. That's something that I actually lifted out of the presentation because it takes some time to go over it, but I think I can summarize pretty well for now. And whoever that's coming from, if you want to follow up with me, please do. But in terms of notarizing copies, so there is a notarial act. It is not authorized in the state of New Jersey, but it's referred to as copy certification. And that is authorized in some other states, but it is not authorized in the state of New Jersey. So what that means is we cannot look at an original passport, in one hand, and look at someone's photocopy of a passport and say, okay, stamped, certified copy, notary stamp, seal, etc. So that's not an authorized notarial act in the state of New Jersey. But that being said, we have worked with our county clerk. Our county clerk maintains a document. It's an affidavit, actually. It's a document certification or it's a copy certification by document custodian. That's the title of the document. It's an affidavit. And what the patron is able to do with that, this is not a replacement for the copy certification notarial act that the patron is requesting. This is simply another option that can be described to the patron. It's not something that we can guarantee the receiving agency will work with. We can say incidentally that we haven't gotten, concerns or patrons coming back to us saying that this document has been rejected. We of course can't say that in 100% of the case it would work, but it's a copy certification by document custodian. There are some blanks on the document where the patron can fill in a portion. So they're basically making a statement saying, I so-and-so certify that this photocopy attached to this paper is true, correct, complete. And is representative of the document that I have in my possession, and they can sign off on that. Since it's an affidavit, we need to witness their signature, and we need to perform, it's a jurat certificate, so we need to perform an oath or affirmation with them, and that certificate language is on there already as well. And we can move forward that way if the patron would like to. So it's a roundabout way of getting to a similar outcome. And there's a lot more on the National Notary Association website on that. So if you're interested in that and want to drop your email, I'd be glad to point you in the direction of those resources, or even add a slide about that before we send out the slides.
Okay, next question. How long is the training to become a notary?
Oh, great question. So there actually is not a required training to become a notary in the state of New Jersey. Some states do have a required training program. New Jersey is not among them. So what we have done in our library system, and something that we will do, so we've started working with the National Notary Association. Of course, it is something that we pay for. It's something that we purchase when a new notary comes on board, which is not super frequent, I will say, just for context. But when we do have a new notary join us, I believe it's somewhere around $60 to $70 to go through a notary training. The notary training is rather general, but it's great. It runs you through, it's asynchronous, excuse me, so you can take it at any time, but it runs you through quite a number of different scenarios that you might see. So that's one option that we have pursued before through SCLSNJ. We've also engaged notary professionals to come in and speak with us, including our county clerk. So that may be a great place to start if this is something you're interested in, is to connect with your county clerk and see what types of trainings they may be aware of or even offer. We've gone to other county trainings in the state of New Jersey before, and we are also working on some in-house training based on a number of the resources that you see cited in the presentation also. So there's no formal training. We do a lot of sample scenarios when we're working with a new notary in SCLS NJ.
Next question. Do you administer an oath with all signings?
That's a wonderful question. So it depends on the notary certificate. So an oath would be required if the certificate were a jurat certificate, which you see often on affidavits. So an oath is required if the individual is swearing or affirming to the contents of the document or the contents of their statement. So do you swear or affirm that the contents of this document are true and complete, or something of that nature, to the best of your knowledge? We work with some canned language that we have that works for a lot of different of these certificates. So on the other hand, there are other types of certificates called acknowledgement certificates where an oath is not being performed. You are simply taking the patron's acknowledgement that they have signed the document, it's their true authentic signature, and that they are signing of their own free will for the purposes contained within the document. So that's the nuance of the difference there. And to be honest with you, it took me some time as a new notary to really get firm in that distinction. So not all documents require an oath. One of the first things you're doing with a document, and we even do this in the pre-screening now, we ask about the notary language so we can determine ahead of time, okay, am I working with a jurat certificate, so an oath or affirmation, or am I working with an acknowledgement certificate? So I'm giving a verbal acknowledgement.
Nicole, I believe you answered this question already, but I'm going to read it again so everyone can hear.
Thanks.
Here's a situation. We do often have patrons ask us to notarize copies, which we don't do, but would notarize a letter prepared by a patron stating that the copy is genuine. Do you have any guidelines related to this besides the affidavit you referenced?
Sure, that's a great question. So I can't say that I have guidelines myself, but I'm sure that I've pulled from some guidelines over time. So whoever's asked that question, if you want to drop your email as well, I'd be glad to follow up on it and see if there are any notary association bulletins or anywhere that has outlined how to work with that. So it's one of those interesting areas because we're not able to give we're not able to give legal advice to a patron. So we can't say, hey, this will work for you. I know from my perspective, I'm giving you legal advice that this document will satisfy the requirements. That's not what we're working with. We're working more with, here's another option. We've had some patrons even come in and say, well, what if I write that if I write a statement on my document? And that's something that we can work with. If someone's writing a statement and giving them a place to sign on their photocopy, we can say, okay, which certificate would you like to work with? Let me describe to you what a jurat certificate does and what an acknowledgement certificate does. And we can handwrite in a certificate. I know that's getting into the weeds a little bit. Or we can stamp on a certificate. We do keep the same certificate, general certificate language as what we ordered on those full page sheets. We keep that in a stamp form, an abridged version as a stamp as well. So some nuances there. But yes, I'd be glad to look and see where I've pulled some of our best practices from for copy certification.
Thank you.
Sure.
A new question. Are there different kinds of notaries?
That's a great question. So we talked a little bit about there are loan signing agents, there are notaries public. Another important distinction here, and Alfred Piambino in my trusty notary public handbook over here, I'd be glad to see exactly where he references this. But when advertising notary services in Spanish, we have to be very, very clear that we are not able to give legal advice and we are not lawyers. Throughout the world, notaries public that's typically another track. When you advance very high, you're becoming a lawyer and you're going into a certain area of law, or you're becoming a notary public. So there is a perception coming, especially from cultures outside of the US, that notaries public are able to give that level of legal advice and counsel. So that is kind of an aside to the answer to your question. But in terms of different types of notaries public, we certainly work in a number of different venues, and that may dictate where our familiarity with different documents are. But in terms of, you're applying to become a notary public in the state of New Jersey, that's all consistent. That's all the same. We're all applying under the same, application circumstances, and there's no distinction there. So my commission is the same as the commission of a notary who's at a bank. It's just that, of course, that our familiarity with different documents is going to be different. Thanks.
Here's another scenario for you.
Please.
A person walks in, their document is already signed. Do you refuse to notarize it?
Great question. So there are a few different variables that could give you a clue as to where to go next on that. So if the document is compelling an acknowledgement, so if the document, let me articulate this well. So if the notary certificate is an acknowledgement certificate, technically acknowledgements do not need to be signed in front of the notary. The individual seeking notarization is acknowledging that they have signed this document. It is their signature. They have signed it freely and willingly for the purposes contained within the document. So for an acknowledgement, they don't technically have to re-sign that document in front of you. They are giving their verbal acknowledgement. Yes, this is me. This is my signature. I sign this freely and willingly for the purposes contained within it. You've identified them by that point, so that notarization, that notarial act is proper. It's taken place. You're all set there. If this is a jurat certificate and it's an oath or an affirmation that's being performed, there's another nuance here that I'll jump back to, even with acknowledgements. But what you're going to see often on these jurat certificates is subscribed and sworn to before me, signed and sworn to or affirmed before me this day. So when you see that language, signed and sworn to before me, and anytime someone is giving their oath or affirmation, it is my training. Yes, that. So you wouldn't refuse the notarization. What a workaround for this is an individual can strike through their signature and sign again, or they can just sign next to it. And in your notary log, and please ask me if I can help clarify on this, in your notary log, you're noting which signature you notarized. So I notarized the signature on the left. I notarized the signature above the signature on the line. So you're going to see, you know, in a proper notary interaction, and when the person is who they say they are, you're going to see that same signature twice, you know. But it's not necessary to refuse that notary interaction. The individual might not be comfortable re-signing the document, and then there are other options as well. You may want to attach a notary certificate and invalidate the initial notary certificate. So there are a lot of different ways to do it. What I will say has been really helpful to us, and I know that this all is dependent on a number of different factors for different practicing notaries. The National Notary Association, again, we've really worked closely with them. Because of their national purview, it's really helped inform best practices at the state level. So they maintain a hotline that is staffed for all of the hours that we are open. So I imagine it would match, except for Sundays, perhaps your library as well. So it's $26. Last time we ordered, it was $26 per individual notary, and it's a year's worth of hotline subscription. So when we're really not sure what the best move might be, if there's limited space in the certificate, that's a great resource. So phone a friend, talk to another notary, or speak with a national notary professional if that's something you're interested in. Speak to your county clerk, someone who trained you, if you need some counsel in that moment, or some, to not use such a legal word, if you just want some perspective in that moment. But patrons who've come before me before, who have signed their oath already, we've talked about, okay, you know, you do actually need to sign this before me. In one or two cases, the patron had another copy of the document with them that was already filled except for the certificate, or they were able to print it and destroy that document that was with them. So that's an interesting option. And then in others, we've either attached a certificate or they've just re-signed in a different area of the document. And I literally wrote down, I notarized the lower signature or the left signature or the signature in blue. So details in the journal record. I hope that answers your question. Thanks.
Thank you, Nicole. Those
sure.
are all of the questions we had through the chat.
Okay, great.
If anyone else has one and you want to jot it in there quick, or you want to unmute yourself to speak up, that is welcome at this time.
Yeah,
and just so you know, Laura, I do see your email in the chat, which you intend to share with Nicole so she can follow up with you. I don't know if Nicole can see it right now, but I wrote it down so I can share it with her.
Thank you so much. Great. And yes, and I will again say, so what qualifies me to present this information is just that I've been a notary. I have had some of these experiences. I'm just sharing my experiences, what I've gleaned and learned and absorbed by osmosis from being around so many notaries over the years and working with a lot of different trainers. Again, remember, New Jersey notarial law is widely interpretable. What works for our library system might not be how your library is interpreting this information, and we've deferred to the experts that are cited at the end of the New Jersey Notary Manual, including Mr. Piombino, who has been here and worked with us before, the National Notary Association, American Society of Notaries, and more. So thanks so much.
Okay, no other questions had popped up in the chat, so it
Okay.
is after 3 o'clock, so it will be
Aha.
we'll be respectful of everybody's time. But if you do
Course.
have questions, Nicole's information is on the screen, and you can also email the NJALA committee, and I'll type our email in the chat.
Great.
And this was a recorded session, so it's going to be available on the njala.org website and our YouTube channel. Just to tease our next event, it's going to be on Thursday, July 8th. It's a non-recorded event where you can network and you can vent some of your frustrations around the COVID-19 pandemic.